Courage and honor, cousin.
Into the fires of battle, unto the anvil of war.
Hello, and welcome to Warhammer 40k's Grim History from the Beyond. I'm Zekthar,
And I'm Yuxin.
and we are the chroniclers of all that was, and all that will be in the 41st millennium. We have seen the rise and fall of many empires, and this month we'll be discussing the mysterious Dark Angels.
That's right, Sektar. And this week we'll be discussing the Dark Angels during the Great Crusade, or more emphatically, the Rangdan Xenocides.
Quite right, brother, but first, we have a couple questions from our local Dark Angels enthusiast, Hermes. His first question is, what are your favorite Dark Angel theories that have not been confirmed yet, but you guys think are very likely?
Well, other than, who Cypher is.
Well, Yuxin thinks Cypher is Alpharius.
Well, even if he isn't, I would love to know who he is.
You think he's an Alpha Legion?
Possibly.
From what I gather, it's not like he spends a whole lot of time in the warp either. So,
Yeah.
which is weird because he's
popped
been
up
around.
here
That means
and
he's been
there.
around for 10,000 years.
And he's hanging out with Eldari. Who knows who else he's hung out with.
Personally, like I've said before, anyways, I'm not really a Dark Angels enthusiast. So when you're talking about like rumors and whatnot with the Dark Angels, that's the only one I can really think of, the Cypher. And is he Alpharius or not? Sure, why not? If he really has been around 10,000 years, we have made mention anyways that Space Marines could probably live up to about 3,000 to 4,000 years. But the oldest one we've got right now is Dante, and he's people can noticeably see he's old. So I don't think that they're immortal by any stretch of the imagination. They just have a long shelf life. But Primarchs, on the other hand, yeah, Primarchs, on the other hand, anyways, I don't think I think that they are immortal until something kills them. So it would make sense to me, anyways, that Cypher could very well be Alpharius, yes, or Omegon. I know you don't want to hear that, Hermes, but it wouldn't surprise me. But other than that, I really don't have any other real strong feelings on the Dark Angels. I do think it's pretty cool that the Lion is bringing the Fallen back into the fold. That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Although that's been fairly recent, so that's probably squashed a lot of those rumors. And I also do like the fact that they kind of piss off the Black Templars. I got nothing on this for rumors wise. What about you, Yuxin?
No, I'm about as lost as you are when it comes to rumors.
Okay. But you did give us some questions anyways that we could actually sink our teeth into. And your second question was, what happened with the Dark Angels and the Cacodemons? We looked up the Cacodemons, and the only thing that came up anyways that we could find was the Cacodemons, which was given to an extremely powerful alien cyborg psyker that was there during the Howling in M34. What the Dark Angels did with him? Nothing. He was eventually killed by the Black Templars.
Right.
Which, when he died, though, caused a huge problem in the Astronomicon and burned out billions of astropaths across the Imperium. But it wasn't a Dark Angel story. We were kind of surprised to see that. It was a Black Templar one. But what other questions did Hermes send us?
Well, the next one that he asked was, who can actually beat the Lion? And I don't mean with the special weapon.
If we were talking about the Resurgent line, the one that's in the 41st millennium, that's a tough question. So I'm assuming that we're talking about people that aren't lost in the warp in particular. So
I know right away. I'm pretty sure the main 4 Chaos Gods could.
Yeah, well, no, I was saying what I meant was that we've had the argument before, anyways, who can beat the Lion back during the Horus Heresy with all the Primarchs, because it seems like his best competition would be another Primarch, but instead, let's just go ahead and take all those guys off the table, except for the ones, anyways, that we know, anyways, are still around, that aren't lost. So we're going to knock out, anyways, Lehman Russ, the Khan, Rogaldorn, I know everybody says he's dead, but they only found his arm. He's probably floating out there somewhere in space. And also your boy, Salamander's Vulcan, because they can't find him either. I'm going to go ahead and say also, let's go ahead and eliminate Lorgar and Corvus Corvax, because they're kind of, because Corax is hunting Lorgar, and Lorgar is hiding behind that big door of his. So they're in the warp, so they're not coming out of the warp anytime soon. So that leaves us with, at this point anyways, kind of the big baddies. The big baddies out there would be, let's see, that'd be comparable. Well, Mortarion, Bobby G, Fulgrim, and then Perturabo, right? Those would be the Primarchs that are left. And then just like really tough bad guys that are left.
Lucius Sea Turtle.
Yeah, I guess. Sure. Why not? Let's throw him in there. Let's see here. Gazgul, we could probably throw him in there. He's a pretty big baddie. Vashtor, we could probably toss him in there too. Why don't we throw
the petulant child's name? The one that he doesn't like. Sorry.
Oh, well, there's like a couple bloodthirsters and some other guys, anyways, but I don't think that they're on the same level. And let's just for giggles, let's throw Belisarius Call in there. Why not? So, out of all those guys, the only ones I can see, anyways, that have a good shot against.
Oh, Abaddon, you didn't throw that.
Oh, an Abaddon, right. Well, yeah. Okay, we'll throw him in there too. Why not? With the Loyalists, quite frankly, anyways, I think Gilliman would have a good shot beating the line. And okay, now here's my reasoning why. Because Gilliman has that one thing that everybody wants in 40K.
Plot
and it's
armor.
very simple. Yes, you got it.
Which is why Gazgul will never win because of plot armor.
But if we're not talking about plot armor, then I don't think anybody in the Imperium could beat the Lion. I mean, if you're talking lore-wise, Gazgul at this point, anyways, I mean he's up there at Primarch level. I wouldn't say he could beat the Lion. I would not say that. Quite frankly, the only guy I can really see right now, anyways, that could really beat the Lion would be Perturabo. And I'll give you my 2 cents on
can do it.
Okay, well, you think Fulgrim could?
I'm not sure. That's why I'm asking you.
Okay, well, who are you picking? I'm picking Perturabo. Who are you picking?
Okay, so the two people that I would throw up there, one of them is Mortarion, but that's just because so long as Mortarion would be able to hold it back from doing a strategic blow,
he would have to do.
We've talked about this before when it comes to Mortarion. One of the main advantages that he had was he could tank pretty much anything.
And he slowly saps your strength.
And then he slowly saps your strength.
So the Lion pretty much would have to do the exact opposite that he did with Angron the last time he fought Angron, right?
Yeah, because Mortarion would just look at him when he's trying to taunt him and stuff and go, okay.
Well, no, remember the last time the Lion fought Angron anyways, he just kind of kept goading him until Angron became just like this psychopathic rage and until he started making mistakes and the Lion took advantage of it. The Lion couldn't do that with Mortarion. He would have to take the offensive.
Plus, Mortarion couldn't really. I can't see him being provoked, really.
Not by the Lion.
By the Lion. I know that the con I was able to get underneath his skin, but. And the only reason why I say Caldor Drago is just because he's ridiculous.
Drago is the cheat code of the Grey Knights. We can't use him. He doesn't count.
And the reason why he popped into my mind is because he literally basically banished Mortarion for a while from even being able to enter the mortal world.
Oh, we forgot about Magnus. Yeah. That's the other guy. But no, I don't think Magnus can take the Lion. But you mentioned Fulgrim. Fulgrim was always a pretty good swordsman, but I don't think he ever was really on the level of the Lion. And
the only thing I can see that could contradict that is the fact that now he has
he's a forearms, swing swords,
4 swords instead of just.
And you can't trip him because he's got sneaky thing. But
yeah,
go for the legs. What legs? I think, anyways, quite frankly, Fulgrim is just problem I have with Fulgrim at this point, anyways, is that he's just so obtuse. He's just kind of like, he does things on a whim. So, I mean, if he got it into his head that he really wanted to kill the lion, that would be interesting. But I still think the lion could beat him.
Yeah.
Now, Perturabo's a
because
different
he is
story.
something that could be somebody who could be very, very easily goaded, in my opinion.
Yeah. Fulgrim? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He way more than Mortarion. Perturabo is the only
More
guy
than Angron, even.
Yeah. Perturabo's the only guy I could think of, anyways, chaos wise, just simply because he's the smart one. I mean, the fact of the matter is that I don't think that when you say beat the lion, I don't think that he would duel the lion and then beat him. It would be more along the lines of what he did against Angron in the Horus Heresy, where he just kind of sat back, waited for Angron to pretty much lose all steam, and then he came in anyways and just tore him up.
He would be more inclined to just set a mine and just and then wait for or lead the lion to step on it.
Yeah, he would definitely be much more anyways the guy that would lead the lion into a trap, and then once his head's turned anyways, then Perturabo would step in and thump him. That's what I mean by beat him. Now in a duel, I don't see Perturabo winning that one. Although I never count out Perturabo anymore. The more that I learned about him, just simply because there's a lot about him that just kind of gets passed over. I mean,
there's a lot that we don't really know because of the fact that he is one of the lesser cataloged people. Yeah.
But regardless, any of these guys, anyways, that are going to fight the lion, anyways, it's going to be incredibly tough. I mean, and I wouldn't put a whole lot of stock in them winning. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Would they? Sure. Will they though? No, I don't. I just don't see anybody right now that's powerful enough. Other than, like I said, Gilliman, because I mean, like the Emperor would save him or something like that. But
like he has in the past.
Yeah. But yeah, if I was going to put my money on somebody fighting against the lion, it'd be Perturabo. But we got to keep moving on here. The last question we got from Hermes is, if Leman Russ is the Emperor's executioner, what does that make the lion?
So, to be fair, it was Leon Russ and his legion that were considered the executioners in reference to they were the ones to be put in charge of getting something done no matter what the cost.
If I also recall right, Leman Russ kind of self-titled himself that, didn't he? I think that's kind of how it went. It wasn't like the Emperor was like, "You will be my executioners." I think Leman actually kind of took that title on himself. I mean, quite frankly, Lionel Johnson should have been the War Master, in my opinion.
Except for, he had that whole...
Didn't play nice with others.
He didn't really play with others, period. Sort of thing.
I mean, he could learn. The whole political aspect of it anyways, he'd have problem. Well, I don't think he would even deal with it. They'd be just like, you need to deal with all this political jargon. And he goes, no, I don't. I'm the War Master. Give it to Malkador. That's what he's here for. But yeah, I mean, maybe the Emperor's other executioner. There you go. If you look at their war records, it's kind of interesting because, Hermes, you're not going to like this, but if you look at the Space Wolves, the Dark Angels, the way that the legions were used actually during the Great Crusade were incredibly similar. They kind of did the jobs that nobody else wanted to get done. They worked a lot in a lot of secrecy. They kind of stormed and killed anything that came in front of them. I mean, you could, even during the Rangdan Xenocides anyways, if the Space Wolves helped, by the way, during this whole thing anyways, but if you unplugged the Dark Angels and plugged in the Space Wolves there, I could see the whole thing working out almost the same. Right. That's just my opinion. But what do you think, Euxin?
I'm not exactly sure what the lion would be considered. Maybe if we had a better basis off of who on earth he was supposed to be the mirror of. What I mean by that is I remember right, there was some sort of thing going around the fact that each one of the Primarchs had a opposite person to them, kind of like Perturabo and Dorn. Those are two that come off the top of my head.
Lehman and the Lion. That was his opposite, actually. But
Yeah.
uh,
No, you're looking at two of the same sort of person
yeah,
or group.
Lehman and the Lion.
Right. So it'd be like, okay, you have the Executioner and then the Executioner's Executioner.
That's pretty much what it was. I mean, we've talked about this anyways. The concept, the rumor is that when the Great Crusade was over, the Emperor was going to use the First Legion, the Dark Angels, to wipe out the rest of the Space Marines. That was kind of the concept for a couple of reasons. One is because there were so many of them, and two, they had all of the Dark Age technology weapons,
right?
That they could use. So that's when you're talking about like really grim and dark, is like, which is funny because it's supposed to be like the light at the end of the tunnel. It's like, no, everything just kind of, if everything went according to plan, all the people that you know and love were just going to die. That was that's the end of them. Magnus was going to be shoved into the Golden Throne, and he was going to be the Corpse King pretty much. The Emperor was going to just kind of be the cool dude on the top. And who knows what would have happened to the rest of his sons. That's the other thing, too. Is, I mean, he really did use them as tools.
Right.
A lot of times. So, yeah. But, yeah. Well, there you go, Hermes. I hope that answered your questions. It probably gave you a whole lot more questions.
Well, yes. Once again, thanks for the questions, Hermes. And if you have any further questions or anybody else that's also listening, feel free to ask them and we'll try to get to them the following week. But on to the Rangdan Xenocides.
Quite right, Euxin. Now, of all the campaigns waged by the First Legion, it is their battles against the Rangda that have most intrigued historians and scholars. For the veil of secrecy cast over these engagements have served only to make the myths that have taken the place of the truth all the more grand. There is little information to be found outside the most carefully guarded sections of the Imperial archives and the records of the Dark Angels themselves, a legion well known for rigorously maintaining its many secrets. However, after looking through thousands of scrolls, letters, and books, I found a pretty decent source for much of my research, and that would be the data cores of the Rebel Forge world of Zama 2. Raided and burned by the Loyalist forces during the Great Scouring, before its dark magi fled into exile, I was able to copy most of their text before the First Legion could seal it away. It is from these meticulously gathered scraps of knowledge that a true picture of the first battle between the Dark Angels and the Rangda can be formed. Now, from what I've gathered, the newly burgeoning Imperium and the Rangda Empire kind of ran into each other by accident. Both groups were expanding, in particular when the Imperium expeditionary fleets of the Emperor's Great Crusade had at last breached the eastern fringe of the galaxy. They had inadvertently attracted the attention of the Rangdan herbivores, an alien species of such macabre power and technological might, it seemed, for a time at least, that the Imperium had met its doom. Facing waves of attack from the galactic east and north, and suffering losses that would not be exceeded until the dark ages of the Horus Heresy, the wars of the Rangdan Xenocides were the most terrible of any yet fought. Now, before we really get into this, a couple of things. First, the Rangdan Xenocides are split into 3 different wars. The first being more of a blundering skirmish, the second being a true war, with only the winner truly surviving, and the third, which was basically a slaughter of the alien species known as the Rangdan. And secondly, the first war took place before the First Legion had found Lionel Johnson, and was led by their second Grandmaster, Urian Vandreg. And lastly, before we get into the wars, we should probably discuss who the Rangdan were themselves. Now, very little is known about the species, since the records surrounding the conflict were sealed long ago. Reports say that the Rangda attacked with 2 forms of warriors, the Rangdan Cerebrivores and the Rangdan Ocereivores. Their elite warriors were said to be a rare match for the Space Marine in combat, wielding weaponry perhaps even more advanced and superior to that possessed by the Imperium and protected by personal defensive energy shields. The Rangda preferred to have others fight their battles, unleashing vast legions of slave armies, drawn from multiple intelligent species and sending them against the foe. seeking to exhaust their enemies until the exact right moment to strike presented itself. Their campaigns were conducted by officers known as war masters, while the elite Rangda, who commanded their slaves, were known as overlords. The Rangda were capable of creating vast artificial war moons, manned by millions of slaves who were controlled via neural collars that caused intense pain if the slave sought to remove it or disobey the Rangda masters. The Rangda warships fired radioactive electromagnetic blasts known as shadow blasters for the ominous shadow they left behind of their victims' remains. The Rangda starships were characterized as a somewhat organic appearance, possessing spines and flails, which dragged behind the void craft like metallic tentacles, giving them the appearance of a Terran jellyfish. It seems that the Rangda were also said to possess the Slav murder minds, suggesting they had some sort of alliance with the foul Slav. The Slav were observed following in the wake of the Rangda by Imperial forces, harvesting the bodies of the dead and any survivors they came across to feed their unnatural hunger.
Ugh, I hate those guys.
Indeed. But they weren't the only... Pardon?
The worm parasite people.
I think they're called, maggot men? That's another name for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways. But they weren't the only aliens in this empire. It seems as if the Rangdan Empire was more of a coalition built on the backs of slaves. Enslavers were seen in their armies, and you know how dangerous they were. They even had massive beasts known as base mechanics, which were only described as vast Xenos beasts that have thick metallic hides. They really don't get into the thick of it, as far as I know. In fact, I only recall 2 times that they were mentioned. The first was during the devastation of the second Rangdan Xenocide. A base mechanic, Barku, broke the cordon of the galactic northeast to make impact on Majin. The Death Guard Legion in pursuit were decimated, as the macro beast within was activated by unknown means. Only the quick-thinking intervention of the 6th Legion prevented disaster. And they were found after the Xenocide, but they were later destroyed by the 3rd Legion and the 43rd Viridan Solar Auxilia.
Interesting.
Indeed. But one last thing on the Rangda before we continue on with the First War. The Rangda were also feared by the military forces of the Imperium for their skills in mimicry.
What do you mean? They were shapeshifters?
No. But they had very advanced warships that could mimic the sensor readings of Imperial ships, as noted by the 1st Legion, costing the Imperials in ambushes. One quote was, "We have never truly been able to neutralize their ability to foil our tactical instruments. Every fight is unbalanced, fought on terms that rare seldom of our choosing. At the start of this, the difference was the Emperor. Now it is the Primarch. I would swap all their subtle devices for his presence. He has been their destroyer." But getting back to the First War. Now, after the two bumped into each other, the 1st Legion was the first to respond, gathering a mighty armada for the assault on the world of Advex Moors. It is said that some 50,000 warriors of the 1st Legion and another 100,000 support troops drawn from both Imperial Army regiments and the Mechanicum Tahmata forces from nearby Xana were mustered, as well as nearly a full 100 capital-class starships, and many times that of smaller escort craft. At the time, this was a fearsome force of arms.
I dare say anytime,
Mm-hmm.
for that matter.
But one still reckoned lacking by many for the task that they had set themselves, which tells me there was a certain respect for the Rangdan. They were not taken lightly as enemies. The initial reports from the 5th Legion, aka the White Scars, that had made the first charts of the Advex Moors painted a grim picture for the assault force. For the 6 worlds of the Advex Moor system were heavily fortified and garrisoned, so much so that the strategos of the Divisio Militaris would initially believe this, erroneously, to be the seat of the Rangda's power in our galaxy rather than the isolated outpost that it was later found out to be. The vast legions of captured humans and other more exotic breeds of slave awaited the Imperial attackers, slave soldiers bound to the Rangdan masters by cruel neural collars that enforced absolute loyalty and reduced them to little more than savage drones to the Xenos that commanded them. The Rangda themselves possessed many horrific weapons, the product of vile technology, created solely for destruction and subjugation. Okay. As you can definitely see, anyways, I got these from the Imperial records. Um,
Meant for destruction.
I mean, like
Wait.
everything the Imperium has built, but
Weapons. What are they mainly used for?
but anyways,
Destruction. Huh.
but the ultimate expression of this was the vast war moon that sat in orbit of Advex Mors Primus. This immense engine of war could match the firepower of a full fleet of starships and bore armor capable of shrugging off strikes from capital scale weaponry. It would prove the greatest obstacle to the invasion and the most terrible symbol of the Rangda's power and malevolent ingenuity. The First Legion, as aforementioned, was led by the new Grandmaster Urian Vandreg, who welcomed the challenge presented to them. Indeed, to succeed in the face of overwhelming odds and prove the valor of his legion was one of the core goals Grandmaster Vandreg had assigned the campaign, a return to glory for the First Legion. In honor of this goal, the fighting began in grand style as the assembled Imperial fleet tore an opening in a fabric of space to translate into Advex Mors as a single wedge of steel and guns. This feat of navigation, impressive in its own right, was overshadowed by the sheer might of the fleet assembled, with the leading squadron comprised of no less than 3 Gloriana-class battleships, the Invincible Reason, Paradigm of Hate, and Truth's Razor. Those few scattered squadrons of Rangdan warp barques, able to oppose the sudden appearance of the Imperium fleet, were quickly swept aside by the sheer strength of the First Legion's gathered ships. Even the foul weaponry of the Rangdan voidcraft and the apathetic bravery of the neural thralls that crewed them could not slow the Imperium's advance, though the complex electromagnetic weapons employed by those ships left many crewmen crippled by radiation sickness. The invasion of Advex Mors extremists followed these initial successes in orbit, with the Grandmaster himself deploying at the head of the First Legion's 8th chapter to spearhead the assault. Advex Mors extremists possessed only limited strategic worth, playing host to a small facility that refined fuel from the vast seas of liquid hydrogen trapped beneath a thick icy crust, and was defended by only a small garrison of slave soldiers and a single Rangdan overseer. Yet despite this, its value to the morale of the invasion force, and as a statement of the First Legion's power, was immense. 1,000 warriors of the First Legion took to the field against 10,000 of the foe. A frenzied wave of flesh puppets, sent by their Xenos overlords into a mindless fury, to spend their lives recklessly that the foe might be crushed. The dark wave of mind-slaved warriors washed over the First Legion's lines and was shattered and broken by the Legionist Astartes in a battle that lasted but 3 short solar hours, at a cost to them of less than 200 casualties. Urian Vandreg himself descended into the boreal hell of the ice mines and slew the Rangdan overlord in personal combat, emerging to hoist its head before the assembled warriors of his legion. So would go the fighting on the 4 outer worlds, each small garrison isolated by the vast Imperial fleet and destroyed in detail by different detachments of the First Legion, each testing and probing the foe for weakness. The Rangda spent the lives of their slaves wastefully, to bleed the Legion, sending tens of thousands to their deaths to slow their advance and cull the numbers of their invaders, losing but a handful of true Rangda as the First Legion celebrated their victories. Within the space of a few short solar months, the Imperium's fleet had crushed the 4 outermost planets of the system and stood upon the threshold of Advex Mors Primus. Here would begin the true battle, for the First Legion had spent its time subjugating the outer worlds, and Rangda had gathered all their strength amongst the huge shielded fortresses of Advex Mors Primus, and in its skies hung the vast war moon, a sentinel of huge and terrifying power. Here there would be no simple triumph, and the First Legion turned to a far more daring plan to secure victory. Knowing that any effort to destroy the war moon by means of a sustained orbital assault will result in massive casualties and allow the planet beneath even more time to fortify and prepare, Grandmaster Vandreg planned to strike both targets at once, using the might of his Astartes warriors. A single chapter of the Legion would attack the war moon under cover of a diversionary attack by the fleet and disable it from within, while the majority of the Legion would conduct a massive planetary landing and crush the world's capital in a single, focused assault. The phalanx of heavy Imperial battleships advanced on the Advex Mors Primus, but, unlike the previous engagements, The Lumpen Xenos defense barges did not rush headlong to meet them and be torn apart by the heavy guns of the First Legion. Instead, the Rangdan craft formed a defensive constellation about the War Moon, denying the Imperial fleet any easy opening by which to deploy landing craft or make a concerted assault, and displaying a level of tactical awareness hitherto unexpected by the Emperor's forces, who were now forced to attack into the concentrated guns of the foe. The space around Rangda erupted in light as the two fleets clashed above the immense face of the War Moon, and hundreds of thousands of guns let fly, punctuating the void with both the yellow flash of Imperial macro cannons and the malefic green flare of Rangdan shadow blasters. Within the first few moments, both fleets had lost entire squadrons of craft, with concentrated weapons fire from the innumerable guns of the War Moon ripping apart even the most heavily shielded of the Imperial voidcraft and spreading storms of debris across the battle war zone. This was a war of attrition the Imperial forces had wanted to avoid and could ill afford to prolong, but one that they could not easily abandon without ceding control of the Advex Morus Primus to the enemy. It would only be the sacrifice of the battleship Paradigm of Hate that would finally turn the tide of the engagement. The ancient battleship, its void shields flaring as it strove to absorb the sheer weight of fire thrown at it, plowed into the enemy's formation and scattered the lesser ships of the Rangda, infested by Rangdan stalker drones and badly wounded by the exotic directed energy weapons of the Xenos craft. The Paradigm of Hate slammed into the vast hull of the War Moon, gouging a deep wound in its metal hide. The survivors and its crew and the contingent of the First Legion warriors aboard the battleship took up defensive positions within the shattered wreck of their vessel and set the plasma reactor to reach catastrophic overload, even as the Rangda host aboard the vast War Moon moved to overwhelm them. A brief and bloody action was fought in the cold void on the War Moon's surface, with full detachments of towering Rangdan warriors committed to battle for the first time. Brutally strong and armed with weapons of terrible power, the Rangda proved a match for the Legiones Astartes, both sides inflicting serious casualties upon their foe, but the Rangda could not overrun the First Legion's defenses in time to prevent the Paradigm of Hate's vengeance. The warriors that had once rowed the proud ship into war sacrificed themselves that she might strike one last blow against the foe, her reactors exploding like a miniature sun, crippling the vast War Moon and spreading a deadly storm of debris across high orbit. With its death, the battle fleet had brought the rest of the fleet a brief respite, a chance to press the foe, and the orbital battle quickly fell into a chaotic melee of intermixed starships and squadrons, each locked in a desperate struggle for survival in a mass of duels between individuals and squadrons. The remaining Imperial battleships, Invincible Reason and Truth's Razor, blasted a path into low orbit, weathering enemy attack craft and strikes from ground-based weapons platforms to begin landing ground forces, abandoning any attempt to capture the shattered and silent War Moon. As the sky filled with the light of thousands of tiny battles fought in the void, the massed forces of the First Legion made planetfall, a rain of drop pods falling on the wasteland away from the chain of fortresses that girded the equator, while several smaller forces dispersed in squadrons of gunships and Stormbird transports. It would be these smaller forces that saw action first, mounting raids on the nearest fortresses and those columns of Rangdan slave soldiers sent to investigate the landing zone, buying time with the blood of the enemy for the brothers to array themselves for battle. For the first day, these raiding columns, mostly led by the warriors of the Order of Crows and the marshals of the Host of the Wind and Fire, bore the brunt of the fighting. At first, they only had to contend with lesser forces of slave soldiers, driven into the path by the Rangda to weaken them and easily bested by the battle-hardened Legiones Astartes. But they would also be the first to face the true Rangda in combat. Little is known of the alien enemy those warriors faced. They were towering creatures of fell strength, inhuman cunning, and bearing the products of a cruel technology that equaled or even exceeded that of mankind is common to all tales that would later be told. The warriors that fought these initial battles suffered terribly, many of the columns reduced to less than half their original strength as they fended off the Rangda, and several were annihilated entirely. But the information they procured was priceless indeed. The tactics, weaponry, and character of the Rangda were laid bare to the Grand Master Vedrig, though at the cost of several hundred of his finest warriors. And with this, he planned his next steps. Arrayed in order to take full advantage of their foe's weakness, The hosts of the First Legion advanced in force to meet their enemy, a host of nearly 30,000 Astartes in full panoply of glory and with all the brutal weapons of their trade. The full muster of those still combat capable and not bound to serve in orbit aboard the ships of the fleet. Such a force was a threat that could not be ignored by the Rangda, proud and still certain of the superiority, quickly moved to oppose the creatures that dared to invade their home. The two armies met across 100 kilometers of Advex Moor's broken outlands. The initial stages of the battle were fought against the slave legions of the Rangda by the screening elements of the host of blades and the heavy tanks of the host of iron, warriors ready to counter this by now familiar Rangdan tactic, knowing that the true Rangda would expend their slaves with abandon in order to pinpoint a weakness in the Astartes' lines before attacking. Pitting their strength against the weakest point of their opponent, Grandmaster Vandrig had massed his finest warriors, veterans of the host of crowns and bone, to act as a mobile reserve. Meanwhile, mobile elements of companies led by warriors of the host of wind, mounted on swift jet bikes and land speeders, isolated and harried the main body of the Rangdan force and relayed precise information on their movements. Made complacent by Terran's centuries of conquest and success, the Rangdan elite watched and waited, fully assured that they would claim victory once committed to the fighting against an exhausted and drained foe. Now, rather than wait for the hammer blow to fall and sunder his formation, Grandmaster Vandrig moved fast, leading a charge that burst through the slave soldiers' battalions and bore down upon the waiting Rangdan overlords. Too proud to retreat in the face of such a challenge, the Rangda met the warriors of the First Legion blade to blade, in a savage melee that tested mettle of both forces. The stoic brutality and measured swordsmanship of the First Legion, matched by the savage might and cruel technology of the Rangda. Legionist Astartes warriors were cut asunder by Rangdan warriors, enveloped in layers of energy shielding that burned the very air about them as they fought, while the lithe, vulpine Xenos fell before the great swords of the First Legion Terminators. It was a slaughter that would have ended in mutual annihilation, both sides equally matched in skill and power, until Vandrig met the Rangdan War Master in single combat. Vandrig was a superlative swordsman, strong of arm and swift in battle. Yet his foe was a towering Xenos monster, cloaked in burning energy fields and wielding a huge crystalline blade that bled a neurotoxin of hideous potency. For an hour the duel raged, and as their warriors died around them, the two generals fought with savage ferocity, neither giving an inch. In the end, though racked by the pain of the toxin raging in his blood and his armor rent and sundered, Urian Vandrig slew his foe and held high the severed head of the Rangdan War Master. The battle decided and the pride of that foul Xenos breed broken. With the greatest strength of the foe shattered in open combat by the warriors of the Emperor, and their War Master a cooling corpse in the dust, those Rangda that remained fled and took refuge in the fortresses left to them. However, with the Imperium ships consolidating control of orbit now that the War Moon had been broken, and the Grandmaster's host having scattered the greatest strength of their defenses, the Rangda were a broken force. The next few solar months became a series of grueling sieges as the First Legion surrounded and reduced each of the Rangdan fortresses by storm, leaving no stone upon stone, and utterly erasing all trace of the enemy on a world that had once claimed. While in orbit, specially equipped cadres of breachers and destroyers swept the vast ruins of the War Moon, slaughtering the thousands of Rangda still trapped in the labyrinthine warrens. Yet the cost of this victory in the first Rangdan Xenocide was staggering, with some 10,000 of the First Legion slain and 50 Imperial ships of the line utterly destroyed, including the irreplaceable Paradisium of Hate, the wreckage of which could not be salvaged from the fused remains of the Rangdan War Moons. This was the legacy the First Legion wished to leave. A symbol of their legion to the barren waste they made the Advex Moors, and a message to those who might seek to oppose them. Those that would seek war with the First Legion would be met by a foe that would not balk when faced with the highest cost to claim victory. A host that would bring an enemy not only to defeat, but to utter annihilation. And well, the Dark Angels got their wish. In the aftermath of the Imperium's assault, the Rangda paused in their conquests elsewhere to turn their eye back upon Advex Moors and the surrounding star systems, now swarming with Imperium colonies and fleets. The victory at Advex Moors despite the steep price paid to secure it, would prove to be little more than a prelude to the true alien assault. Now, before we get into the meat of the Second Punic War...
Don't you mean Rangdan Xenocide?
Oh, yeah, right. What do you think of the Dark Angel's actions, as well as the Rangdan Coalition?
Well, the coalition is in itself, horrible.
They did align with some pretty creepy dudes.
Yeah. Like the Slach.
Yeah, the Slach.
At the same time, I mean, you obviously have something to say by the fact that you called them the Punic Wars, but
yeah. I'm getting my soapbox ready, but I'm gonna let you talk first.
the Dark Angel's actions, I don't know why they thought morale would be an issue personally, since they are Space Marines.
That has to do with actually a character we will probably talk about next week, which would be the first Grandmaster of the Dark Angels. He kind of led the Dark Angels into a horrific defeat and died in the process. So,
Okay.
They were not looking too terribly good.
Okay.
At the time. That's why he was fine. He wanted to find a battle that would rally them all. Good old Scipio. I mean,
Van Drake. Other than that, I think the Dark Angels I think they did a decent job with what they had. Let's just put it that way. Because they're going in with like nothing originally. And
what do you mean?
well, they didn't really have any idea of what they were going up against originally, other than, ooh, there's Xenos here. We must wipe them all out.
Oh, I think they did. You don't bring 50,000 Stardays and 100,000 Imperial soldiers with you just on a, I don't know what it is, kind of thing. I think that they knew what they were getting themselves into. It was going to be a fight. I think they knew that. Now, if you're talking about, anyways, the tactics that the Rangda used, yeah, okay.
That's what I'm talking about.
Okay. But just like I said before, anyways, the massive amount of units that they brought with them, and still thinking we might not have brought enough, tells me, anyways, that they had tussled before this point. So that they knew, anyways, at the very least, that this coalition was not something to be taken lightly.
Right. That's pretty much all I had. I'll let you talk on your soapbox now.
Okay. So the Rangdan Xenocides reminds me a lot, actually, of Terran 42's first, second, and third Punic Wars. This one, anyways, in particular, anyways, what really struck me about this is that it reminds me, anyways, of the Battle of, I believe it's called the Battle of Zama, which took place, anyways, at the end of the Second Punic War. So the timing's a little bit off. But the way how they used their troops was very similar. First off, anyways, as they mentioned, anyways, the naval aspect of the Rangda seemed to be far more superior than the Imperium, which was very much like, so for those who don't know, anyways, about the Punic Wars, the Punic Wars was fought between the Roman Republic and the Carthaginian Empire. Now, ironically, anyways, well, empire is a relative term. I think they were also a democracy, but that's beside the point. What's more important is the fact, anyways, of how their tactics kind of worked. So Carthage was fairly wealthy, and what they ended up doing, they didn't have a whole lot of well-trained troops. They mainly, anyways, bought mercenaries like Illyrians and that sort of thing. Their standing armies, some of their standing armies, were considered some of the greatest forces in the ancient history. The Sacred Band of Carthage was considered one of the greatest fighting forces in the Mediterranean at that point. They're up there, by the way, for you, Euxin. They're up there, anyways, with Spartans. So, okay. I mean, they were pretty beefy. But then again, anyways, their navy, though, that's what they put all their money into. The Romans, on the other hand, they, ironically, for being out there on the Mediterranean, they didn't really like sailing all that much. They would prefer to fight on the ground. So they pretty much put all their money into their soldiers, and then they built these ships that is like, well, they just need to get us from point A to point B. But what if we fight on the sea? Let's not do that. That's kind of the concept. So, but But this first invasion, it really, and I will continue to bring up the Punic War as we continue going, but just their tactics and the way that they kind of maneuver really is very interesting here, anyways, because it reminds me so much, anyways, of Carthage and Rome. And quite frankly, anyways, what took place during these three wars on both of these kind of sets the scale. With the Rangdan Xenocides, it was whoever won this, by the sounds of it, anyways, would take over the galaxy, right?
Well, at least over a section of it, yeah.
I mean, because it sounds like, anyways, that the Rangdan had won, they would have slowly they would have advanced into the Imperium, and they would have just slowly kept going. Or the Imperium would have won, right? So it was kind of like whoever wins this, anyways, one is going to end up ruling the galaxy, the other one's going to end up being exterminated. Which, by the way, that's kind of how the Punic Wars went too. It was during the Mediterranean, you had two kids on the block, two big kids, two big bullies on the block. And eventually they were going to run into each other, and it wasn't going to be pretty. And it wasn't. By the time the Punic Wars were over, they say anyways, a quarter of the world's population at the time was dead. That's how big these wars were. But, okay, I'll get off my soapbox for a time so you can get to the second Xenocide. Tell us all about that. That's the one. That's like the meat and potatoes of these three, right?
Well, in 862.M30, the Rangda returned to Imperial space, marking the start of the second Rangdan Xenocide. They came not with a single small fleet, but with a vast armada comprising thousands of vessels, as well as over a dozen war moons. A force of might far exceeding that of the small garrisons and expeditionary fleets in the area. They struck at the northern fringe of the Imperium like a thunderbolt, annihilating the fleet set in defense over the fledgling human colonies and forcing their colonists into neural shackles. It was only by the efforts of the expeditionary fleets under the banner of the 5th and 19th Legions, also known as the White Scars and Raven Guard, that the Xenos tide was delayed long enough for Imperial forces to rally, and the price they would pay to buy this respite was staggering. It shall be noted that at the time, the 5th Legion was known as the Star Hunters instead of the White Scars, and the 19th was known as the Pale Nomads instead of the Raven Guard. But that's beside the point.
For you, Hermes. Hermes was asking about what the legions were before. Well, there you go. There's a couple more of them.
Making a stand at the isolated forge world of Zana 2, the combined forces of the 5th and 19th Legions fought a bitter holding action for 8 solar months at a cost of 3,000 of the Legions of Astartes and many hundreds of thousands of Mechanicum thralls. The siege of Zana would be broken by the furious onslaught of the Dark Angels and Death Guard, shattering the Rangdan blockade and cutting a path through the Rangdan slave cohorts on the surface to once again open up the Forge world as a beachhead for the Imperium's counterattacks on the Rangda's domains. What would follow was more than 2 solar decades of war out among the halo stars, millions upon millions of deaths, 19 inhabited star systems laid waste, and a ban on further Imperial expeditions past the exclusion posts on the worlds of Andiris and Morox. Before the crisis was declared ended, contingents from 9 separate Space Marine legions would become embroiled in the fighting, with more than 300,000 Space Marines being deployed at the height of the conflict during the climactic Imperial assault by the Primarch Lionel Johnson on Tizal. Due to the widespread nature of the campaign, the battle honor goes to no single warlord, though 3 of the Primarchs were known to have led their warriors into battle against the Rangda. Despite this, the Primarch of the Dark Angels is widely held to be the foremost commander of the war. The last known battle of the Second Rangdan Xenocide is thought to have occurred in 882.M30, a chance Imperial encounter with the battered Rangdan fleet, a broken remnant of the vast armada that challenged the Imperium and lost. At the time, the truth of the Rangdan campaign, the slaughter endured, and how the Imperium had teetered on the brink of ruin, was concealed. Those worlds tainted beyond recovery by the Rangda were abandoned, and the surviving veterans of the war, sworn to silence, were eliminated. For it was deemed necessary that the Rangda must vanish if the Imperium was to rebuild. Much of its legend would come later, the invention of remembrancers and ideologues eager to promote the glory of the Great Crusade, and was composed of as much fiction as fact. For most citizens of the Imperium, this marked the end of the wars with the Rangda, an end to one threat among thousands. A simple, if bloody, waymarker in the Great Crusade's inexorable path to galactic conquest. Much of what happened during this abyssal conflict is still locked under seal, but what can be said is that with the breaking of the Labyrinth of Night by the Emperor himself, the threat was at last stymied.
Dude, I didn't get that until now.
What the fact that they basically wiped out entire sectors.
No, the Labyrinth of Night. The Noctis Labyrinth.
Okay.
We talked about that. Remember, that's the thing, anyways, where after he took over Mars, he grabbed all the stuff, anyways, that he thought was too dangerous and shoved it into this labyrinth and then locked the doors so that nobody could get in there. So that's how dangerous they were. He literally, anyways, is like, crap, I got to get the stuff, anyways. It's even too dangerous for me.
Yeah.
He went and grabbed that stuff. Damn. Sorry, go ahead.
What remained was for the Rangdan taint to be purged in a subsequent solar decade-long series of biopogroms that left entire human-inhabited sectors lifeless to ensure what was hoped to be a final victory. After this conflict, the Dark Angels Legion created the Order of the Broken Claws to study the Rangda and prepare for the possible return of the horrific Xeno species. With access to the detailed catalog of anatomical data compiled by Firewing operators and Dreadwing chirophages, the depths of this order of the Dark Angels Hecatonistica were trained to stand against the worst Rangda bioforms in combat and emerge victorious. So, what is your opinion on the effects of the prior Xenocide had on this one and how the lion may have been an influence?
I think that the tactics that they learned in the first one, they used in the second one, obviously. But the lion, you know who the lion reminds me of, Yuxin?
Lehman Russ.
No. So, you know how we've always kind of chuckled about the fact that a lot of these Primarchs have a resemblance of people on Terran 42. Like, for instance, Gilman reminds us of, like, for instance, Julius Caesar or Pompey.
Right.
And how Lehman Russ reminds us of Beowulf. And most people would say, anyways, Lionel Johnson would probably be up there with, like, King Arthur or Lancelot. I disagree. I would say that he reminds me of Scipio Africanus.
Okay.
As you know, Scipio.
Scipio or Scipio?
Scipio. As you know, Scipio was the guy who ended pretty much the Second Punic War. That's how much, anyways, I think he had effect on the Rangdan Xenocide. He was very much like Scipio. It wasn't looking good. And this guy showed up and said, I think I can win. And I mean, for the Punic Wars, the Romans were just like, fine, whatever. We need to get rid of Hannibal. We don't know how to do it. So then this 19-year-old kid shows up and proceeds to beat the crap out of the Carthaginians all the way back to Africa. It's actually fairly impressive because, I mean, okay, I haven't talked about him much on this program, but Hannibal Barca is probably one of my all-time favorite generals. And he was the Carthaginian general. He's the guy, for those who don't know who he is, he's the guy that went from Spain all the way across the Alps with his elephants and then came down anyways into the boot of Italy. And he proceeded to beat the crap out of the Romans for years, actually. And then Scipio showed up and changed a lot of their tactics. And instead of actually trying to take on Hannibal, he said, you know what? I think I'll invade Africa. And that's what he did. Hence his name, Scipio Africanus. But this sounds very much like what the Lion would do. It's like, you can't beat me. Okay. You're going to take out the rest of your home planets.
Right.
Then you can go ahead and sit there as long as you want. I'm just going to kill everything else that you love. Oh, you're getting out of your hole now. Ah, I see. The parallels, anyways, here are very emphatic. And this definitely, anyways, takes over the concept of the Second War, except for, as we know, anyways, a lot of this is very politicized for the Imperium. So it just sounds like, we swept through the Rangda, even though they were these terrible, horrible monsters. As opposed to, while the Romans, anyways, for Roman historians, the Romans were always the good guys, they still, anyways, managed to, like, hey, by the way, these guys kind of kicked the crap out of us for a good long time. We did eventually win. That's why we're still here. But
right.
So it to me, anyways, that's fairly interesting how just the propaganda, anyways, of the Imperium war machine is just so ridiculously lopsided. There's no just kind of like, we have a respect for these guys because, they fought hard, but we still kick the crap out of them. It's just like, no, these terrible, horrible, vile things,
Well, one of the things that you mentioned is the fact that they almost try to slide it underneath, but the fact that the Emperor broke open the Labyrinth of Night,
that does that does speak volumes.
Shows you how close they were to failing.
That and the fact that he actually had to step in.
And he was just like, okay, well,
because remember, he didn't like getting away from the golden throne.
The way that sounds is he didn't break it open until after the threat had been dealt with, or the majority of it had. And so he was just using it basically to clean up everything, which is a horrible thing in itself, because he did basically just wipe out entire sectors of all life, including human and Xenos.
Right. Well, not just that, but flora and fauna or anything, anyways, anybody would need, to like survive on these planets.
So you know how horrible we make Krypton to be? This is so much worse.
This is so much worse.
So much worse.
But the fear, anyways, they had of the Rangda, though, because it's like, we need to exterminate all of this stuff just because we cannot have this thing come back to haunt us. Because if it does, we're screwed. So, but speaking of which, we do got to get to the third Xenocide. Now, the third and final Rangdan War, more commonly known simply as the Rangdan Xenocide, is little known and in many imperial histories completely absent. It was conducted sometime in the 890s, M30, under the orders of the Divisio Militaris by the combined forces of the Dark Angels and the Space Wolves. The final and irrevocable xenocidal solution to the threat of the Rangda. That great and terrible Xenos race had been sorely wounded by their losses in the Second War with the Imperium, but not vanquished. They had returned to their ancient homeworlds, and there, nourished by hate and a dog hunger, they had grown strong once again. By chance, those nests were discovered by a roving company of White Scars after the lifting of the Edict of Exclusion from the borders of Rangdan space in 887 M30. News the sons of Jagatai Khan brought to the courts of Lionel Johnson and Lehman Russ. These two Primarchs, often antagonistic, were warlords united by the same bleak purpose. For if the Rangda still lived, they must be swiftly and utterly destroyed, lest they rise again and ignite another great war. Together they had their legions visited hell upon the remaining Rangda, scouring their last worlds clean from orbit and then descending to verify the termination of every hive and fortress with blade and flame. The last campaign was no war, but a brutal and one-sided extermination campaign. Neither Lehman Russ nor Lionel Johnson had an illusion of tawdry chivalry to stay their hands, and they took a savage and final satisfaction in the utter annihilation of every warrior and worker of the Rangda. They were aided by the Mechanicum of Xanath II, which contributed a large expeditionary force, including the Tachmata, commanded by Magos Dominus Anarcharis Scoria and House Malinix, which also took part in the carefully planned genocide of the homeworld of Rangda. In the space of a single Terran year, the galaxy was wiped clean the Rangda, their last formation torn down and all traces of their works brought to ruin. The world of Advex Moors, where the Rangdan conflicts had first begun, was left as little more than plains of fractured glass, formed from atomic fire. It became the site of a chantry house of the First Legion, home of the Order of the Broken Claws, the keepers of the last set of codices that detail the Rangda and their weaknesses. Now, interestingly, Imperial reports that erroneously state that this chantry had been established on the Rangda homeworld, not Advex Moors. Makes some historians believe that the mistake was made on purpose to give more weight to the Imperial claim that the Rangda had been entirely exterminated. This was the end of both the Rangda and the Imperial campaigns against them, a quiet and undignified slaughter, undertaken from the stoic determination that was the hallmark of the two rival primarchs of Caliban and Fenris. If any of the Xenos race known to the Imperium as the Rangda survived this final campaign, in some far-flung outpost beyond the edge of the galaxy, then they have not returned to seek their vengeance. But the sentinels placed by the First Legion still watched and waited, perhaps giving the lie to the Imperial certainty of the Rangda's demise. Now, interestingly enough, the third Rangdan Xenocide is a conflict that is particularly obtuse in Imperial records. There are some sources which entirely discount what I just spoke about. For instance, another account states that the Third Rangdan War was an apocalyptic conflict during which 50,000 Dark Angels were killed as they fought off a massive Rangdan invasion, which brought the entire Northern Imperium to the brink of destruction. These horrific losses eventually contributed to the Dark Angels losing their status as the largest of the Space Marine legions to the Ultramarines. An even third source claims that the Third Rangdan Xenocide was a solar decade-long series of catastrophic xenocidal purges organized by the Dark Angels and Space Wolves to wipe out all life on Rangda-tainted worlds, including those still inhabited by Imperial humans, in a series of exterminatus actions. The result was a campaign far greater in scope than other accounts claim, with countless battles fought across vast swaths of the galactic Northwest during the third conflict. Now, I leave the question to you, Yuxin. What do you think actually happened in the Third War?
Well, I would have thought the concepts that we had more information on would more likely give the correct answer, but then I read Alpharius' autobiography and a strange tale scribed by Chris Wright called First Legion.
I see. And how much can we trust the source of Alpharius? I mean, he's an enigma wrapped in a puzzle.
Fair enough, but these articles are both found in the official accounts found in both the Arcanlums of the Logistica Corpus and the more prosaic works of the Remembrancers.
Well, let's hear it. What happened?
Well, according to my sources, they placed the Alpha Legion's appearance as an active Space Marine Legion in its own right to either the solar decade immediately preceding the commencement of the Fernandes extermination in 972.M30, or as appearing as an unexpected reinforcement power during the darkest days of the Third Rangdan Xenocide. This represents a discrepancy of many solar decades. What is known is that a self-proclaimed Alpharius, the commander of the 20th Legion forces, before the official rediscovery of their Primarch, arrived in the proscribed Rangdan extermination zone and offered help to the Dark Angels Primarch Lionel Johnson, whose legion was badly depleted by the war. This Alpharius offered aid to the Primarch against the Rangda in hopes that the Dark Angels would maintain their prominence and thus one day the Lion would be made the Imperial War Master. Well, Johnson at this time did not even know what the title of War Master portended, but still secretly believed that such a title, if it meant being raised as the first among equals among the Primarchs, might one day be bestowed upon him by the Emperor. Alpharius stated that the 20th Legion would prefer the Lion serve as the future War Master over another Primarch like Robute Gilliman, as he was not so different from the Alpha Legion in his use of secrecy as a potent tool of war. Now, Johnson ultimately rejected this offer, explaining that the offers change, the answer never does, in reference to those who sought to turn him from his path as the hunter of beasts. According to a typically unsubstantiated tale later recounted by Alpharius himself, he was in fact the Alpharius that was present at this meeting with Lionel Johnson. The Alpha Legion Primarch offered his aid to the Dark Angels as he had an interest in moving into the Rangdan war zone to follow rumors of his long-lost twin brother, Omegon, who he believed was on the world of Bar Savor. Once he arrived at Bar Savor, Alpharius and Omegon were reunited, and an Alpha Legion fleet, including his flagship Beta, purged the planet of the Slach Xenos that had followed in the wake of the Rangda during the wars. Yet these events have not been confirmed on whether they were in the second or third Rangdan Xenocides.
As you know, anything that has to do with Alpharius is just going to make everything interesting. Not only that, but on top of that, anyways, you're adding the Dark Angels, who are almost as secretive as Alpha Legion. But this actually brings me up to yet a more intrigue that I just found a couple centuries ago. In a rare record accidentally placed into copies of the Astra Militarism's Imperial Infantryman's Uplifting Private in the 41st Millennium, which recently revealed the long-lost 2nd and 11th Legions of the ancient Space Marines participated in the campaigns of the Rangdan Xenocides, though the scope and nature of their involvement remains unrecorded. So with all this information, what do you think this all means, brother? How do you think the Rangdan Empire collapsed? Was it the Xenocide that the Imperium tells? Or an apocalyptic war that almost ruined the Imperium and ended with the extermination of the Xenos?
Well, if the 2nd and 11th were there, maybe, just maybe, this was an opportune moment for them to be eliminated.
I see how it is. So you think the Emperor was already trying to get rid of them?
Oh, yeah.
Well, that would make sense anyways with Bartok, but I don't know about the other guy. But still, anyways, so what do you think actually happened in the Third War? Do you really, I mean, especially with this information with Alpharius, if he's showing up to help, to me anyways, that makes it sound like it was far from, we're just killing alien bugs. It was, we need help.
And
what do you
then
think?
on the other side, of course, in the same thing, it sounds like with his account, though, on he's trying to see if his brother's there, so he wants to gain access, seems just the opposite of that. He's like, I'd like to assist so I can go into the war zone. It's like, okay, so apparently it isn't as bad a deal as it would first suggest.
Yeah. So what do you think?
I think it's more towards the latter than the former.
So what do you think? It was just a complete genocide?
I assume
with
that
Lehman Russ and
I don't
Lionel
think it was
Johnson?
necessarily a complete genocide. I think there was conflict, but I don't think it was like it'll all be over sort of factor. I think it was, though it also wasn't, we're going to be able to just wipe them out easily. I think it took a while, and there was devastating damage too.
So you're thinking more along the lines of the second version anyways, where there was like 50,000 Dark Angels lost. They needed actually more legions other than just those two to come in.
Yeah, but it wasn't like
to
at the
extinguish
point
it.
where if they had lost, the entire Imperium was lost. I don't think it was
Right,
at that
right.
level.
Well, if it follows the Punic Wars, the Third Punic War was very much like what happened, what's the way the Imperium dictates the Third War of Rangdan. It was pretty much an extermination. After the Second War, the Second Punic War, they levied taxes. The Romans levied taxes against Carthage, and they just kept upping those taxes until Carthage couldn't pay. And then they were just like, well, that was the reason why we haven't attacked you all these years. Well, then we'll arm up and we'll come take our money. And they pretty much destroyed Carthage itself, and then they salted the earth around Carthage so that no one could live there for the next thousands of years. Romans didn't mess around. Very much like the Imperium of Man. We do not mess around. When we kill you, we kill you. So if it was going to actually follow the Punic Wars, it would be that extermination of Lehman Russ and Lionel Johnson. But this whole thing with Alpharius, to me, that kind of makes me think, anyways, it was more along the lines of like you said, anyways, it wasn't the concept that the Imperium might be lost. It was more along the lines that they just kept throwing soldiers upon soldiers, anyways, at this coalition, and it just took a whole lot longer than they thought it was going to, and it became that kind of apocalyptic thing.
I also do find it funny how, for some reason, it's the White Scars that find him again.
Well, what was their original name? They were Star Breakers.
Well, at this point, they were the White Scars, though.
Right, but what they did, anyways, I don't think it really changed, even after they found Jagatai Khan. They were kind of the scouts. They kind of tootled out, and that's how they found people. Or
I know, it's just like
place to conquer.
It's like you have these people that you've put in place to cover this zone anyways, and it isn't until somebody else that enters that zone that actually comes across them. It's like, what were the other people doing?
The White Scars at this point, anyways, only had 95,000 people compared to the Dark Angels, who had 200,000, 250,000.
Right. How does that change the fact that?
So the concept was they found them and they're just like, we're going to need help, so let's go get Big Brother over here anyways to come give us a hand.
No. It's the fact that that place was sealed off by somebody. You'd think the people that's, sealed it off would keep track of that area.
Well, no. Remember what I said anyways, is that it was sealed off, and then they said, okay, it's no longer sealed off. We're going to send an advanced team in to see if they can't find anything. So the White Scars were the first people, anyways, back in, determined anyways what took place, and they found the Rangdan. But do you got any final thoughts, anyways, on this Xenocide? It's been fairly interesting. By the way, thank you, Hermes. Hermes really wanted to talk about this. This was actually started a few months back. So thank you, anyways, for asking for this, because this was actually fairly interesting for me, especially because it had so many similarities, anyways, with Terran 42's Punic Wars. But
as confusing as all get out.
Well, the Punic Wars weren't. They're actually very well documented. But
no.
The Xenocide, not as much. But it is kind of weird, anyways. These last articles that are almost thrown in. It's like, oh yeah, by the way, Alpharius was there. What?
Yep.
Wait a minute. Yeah.
Well, maybe.
Yeah. Did it also mention that the two exterminated legions were there too? No, you didn't.
Well,
they were.
You don't need to know.
I've said too much. Exterminatus. Hit the button. But what do you think of this whole thing?
I thought that it needed to be done at the point that they were at.
Well, to me, I think the interesting thing is,
at least the second one, it needed to be done.
Right.
Because the second one, it's like, okay, there's no, except for the whole, we'll completely wipe out all life on everything from here to here.
I think the interesting thing to me about it is the fact, normally anyways, when we talk about the Great Crusade, it just seems like it's all roses. It's just, what we normally anyways end up hearing anyways is the focus of everything seems to be going swimmingly well for the Emperor. The only problems are finding his lost sons who are scattered across the galaxy. This is the only time that I can really think of anyways where something that was really actually a threat to the Imperium shows up, and it takes half his forces to actually take care of this thing. So, and it gets to a point where it almost doesn't work. That's the thing, anyways, to me, anyways, that's shocking about this. This is by far the most hardening battle, anyways, or war that takes place before the Horus Heresy. So, this is the hardest thing the Crusade has ever come up against. Which is saying something.
The cataloging is referencing in its own title. It is the Great Crusade, so everything must be great.
Right. But like I said, that's the thing that I find interesting about this is that this is an actual Xeno species that really actually threatened the Imperium when the Emperor was there. We've had other times, anyways, where Xenos have threatened the Empire, but it's never been, anyways, when the Emperor was at his strongest, which is pretty impressive. Even the orcs of Ulanor, which was considered like a giant, massive orcish army, anyways. I mean, it took the Emperor, the Luna Wolves, and I think there was like 2 other chapters that were there, and they just kind of crushed it.
Right.
So, to me, anyways, this was, I mean, and those were big beefy orcs from back in the day, not like the orcs today,
right?
As the way that they kind of are described, but yeah, this is something, anyways, that is truly terrifying if you stop and think about it. This very well could have been, anyways, the Imperium disappearing, and it wouldn't have been chaos that did it. That's the other thing. Everybody always says, anyways, that chaos is the greatest threat to humanity. It's like, you think so? Have you heard of the Rangda? Well, on that note, we are out of time for today. Join us next week as we discuss the more famous stories of this chapter, including, like I mentioned anyways, the very first Grandmaster.
Fantastic. But if you enjoyed our little show, could you please be so kind as to push that subscribe, like, or follow button? And if you wish to help us expand our work on 40k lore, by all means, support us by joining our membership program on our YouTube channel, Tales of Ashraka.
Yes, and most importantly, have a great day. And until next time, this is Nectar
and Yuxin
signing off.